Hi everyone, my name is Michaela Meyer, and this is my sociology final. But I want to be upfront with you. This isn't going to feel like a typical class assignment. What you're about to watch is me using a sociological lens to look back at my own life and make sense of how I got to where I am today. Sociologist C. Wright Mills called this the sociological imagination, the ability to see the connection between your personal experiences and the larger social forces shaping them. The idea is that nothing about your life happens in a vacuum. The family you were born into, the neighborhood you grew up in, the schools you attended, the race you were assigned at birth. All of these things are bigger than any one person, and yet they reach directly into the most personal parts of who we are. So that's what I'm doing today. I'm taking you through my life, from foster care to adoption, from my hometown to Washington, D.C., from a substitute teacher named Mr. Arturo to the theories of Robert Agnew and Richard Reeves. I'm going to show you how sociology isn't just something you read about in a textbook. It's something you live. Let's start at the beginning. I was adopted 13 years ago, this coming July. But before that, adoption, my younger sister and I spent the first 5 years of my life in the foster care system, moving from one home to the next, never quite sure where we'd land next. Sociologically, foster care is one of the clearest examples of how early socialization shapes a person. Socialization is the process through which we learn norms, values, and behaviors expected of us in society. And most of that learning happens in childhood, in the environments we're placed in, often without any of our choice of our own. When you're bouncing between foster homes, you're also bouncing between different environments, different roles, different adult figures, different expectations. You pick up behaviors just to survive or adapt, and sometimes those learned behaviors stick around long after the circumstances that created them are gone. My sister and I carried some of those behaviors into our new home after we were adopted. That's not a character flaw, it's sociology in action. Environment shapes behavior. The social structures we're born into leave a mark. When we were adopted, everything changed. And I mean that in the most sociological sense possible. In sociology, a primary group is a small, close-knit group defined by deep personal bonds, usually family. Primary groups are where we form our core values and our foundational sense of who we are. They're the people who shape us before the rest of the world even gets a chance to. My adoptive parents became that primary group for me. My mom instilled a work ethic in me that honestly set the entire course of my life. She went to the University of Kentucky, and she made sure I got to visit campus as a kid. So much so that it lived in the back of my mind as this place I could picture myself being. That's not a small thing. When you grow up being able to imagine yourself somewhere, you're far more likely to actually get there. The stability, the encouragement, the sense of the possibilities being real and not just theoretical, that all came from my family. Primary groups don't just give you love, they give you a framework for how to move through the world. And mine gave me a good one. I grew up in northern Kentucky, a predominantly white suburban community, and for most of my early childhood, that's what the world looked like to me. Everyone around me shared my skin color, religion, and general background. It was normal because it was all I knew. But as I got older and more people moved into my town, things started to shift. I remember being on the playground one day and watching a friend of mine, who was Chinese American, being mocked by my classmates who were pulling their eyes to look like hers. I didn't speak up in that moment, and I thought a lot about that since then. But what I remember most clearly is the feeling that hit me. She wasn't being teased for anything she did. She was being teased for something she had absolutely no control over. It wasn't just her either. There was a kid from India who brought cultural food that didn't match what everyone else was eating. The black student who just wanted to make friends. Over and over, I was watching people get treated differently, not for their character, but for their identity. As a white girl from the suburbs, I was largely shielded from this racial discrimination. The closest thing I experienced was being teased for practicing a different religion than most of my classmates. And I want to be careful here. I'm not comparing religious teasing to racial discrimination. They're not the same. But that experience gave me a small window into what it feels like to be othered, and it made me more attuned to what was happening in others around me. One of the most significant forces in my life has been education, and more specifically, access to quality education. Dr. Red Chetty's research on social mobility identifies the quality of public schools as one of the 5 major predictors of whether somebody can move up in socioeconomic status. And I want to pause on that because it matters. My schools were well funded. I had the opportunity to take dual credit courses with Campbellsville University while I was in high school. I trained at multi-million-dollar athletic facilities. I had teachers who pushed me, resources that supported me, and a curriculum that prepared me for college. Not everyone gets that, and I know that. Part of why I volunteer as much as I do is because I'm aware that the opportunity I have is not the norm. It's a product of where I happen to grow up. Being adopted also opened a door that changed my trajectory entirely. Because I was adopted through the Kentucky foster care system, I qualified for a tuition waiver for any Kentucky public university for up to 150 credit hours. That one policy effectively eliminated out-of-state schools from my list and pointed me towards the University of Kentucky, where I'm headed this fall to study political science. That decision wasn't purely personal. It was shaped by institutions, by policy, by systems. That's the sociological imagination at work in my own college application. Now I want to introduce you to somebody who's changed the way I see the world. His name, or at least the name I know him by, is Mr. Arturo. He's a substitute teacher at my high school, and I've had the privilege of knowing him for the past 4 years. Mr. Arturo grew up in Cuba. He lived through life before Fidel Castro took power, eating his mother's award-winning tostones, playing in the streets with neighborhood kids, dancing in a multi-generational household. He told me about buying apples at the market with his mother, which sounds ordinary until you realize that something as simple as that would later become a memory of freedom. As Castro aligned with Cuba and the Soviet Union, Mr. Arturo became a physics professor. And at some point, he made a decision that took incredible courage. He asked to move to America. His boss told him directly, if he was unsuccessful, he would never be able to work as a professor at that university again. That was a formal sanction, a real institutional consequence placed on him for deviating from the norm of conforming to the regime. He went anyway. He came to the United States. He built a life here. Today, he's well past retirement age, but instead of retiring, he substitute teaches so he can help pay for his daughter Sylvia's tuition at the University of Kentucky, and so he can keep sharing his message of kindness, selflessness, and patriotism with students like me. Talking to Mr. Arturo is one of the most profound things I've done in high school, not because of what he taught me in a classroom, but because of what he showed me about culture, sacrifice, and perspective. One of the questions I asked Mr. Arturo was about voting, why he thinks people should vote. His answer stopped me in my tracks. He said, voting is a constitutional right, a contribution to democracy, and a moral obligation. He believes the United States is facing a morality crisis. He is the first person at the polls. He takes it seriously in a way that, if I'm being honest, never quite had to. And that's the key phrase, had to. Because I've always lived in a country where I could vote, where I could speak freely, where the government couldn't tell me what to think or silence me for dissenting. I've always had those rights, which means sometimes I take them for granted. This is cultural relativism, the idea that to truly understand another person's values and behaviors, you have to understand the context they came from. When I look at Mr. Arturo's passion for voting through the lens of his experience in a communist regime, it doesn't just make sense. It's the only response that makes sense. That perspective shifted something in me. Let me shift to talking about how sociologists understand identity through the concept of status. Statuses are social roles that shape how we're seen by others and how we see ourselves. There are two main types: ascribed statuses, which we are given involuntarily, like our age or our family position. For me, that means being a teenager and being the eldest daughter. I didn't earn those roles, I was placed into them. Then, there are achieved statuses, the ones that we earn through effort and merit. I've earned two that feel central to who I am: an honors student and cross-country team captain. Those took work, academic determination, leadership, and dependability. But here's what's interesting. Holding multiple statuses at once creates tension. Sociologists call this role conflict, and I live it. There have been times when my responsibility as team captain directly clashed with my responsibilities as the eldest daughter. I was pulled in two directions, and someone always got the less of me than they deserved. I also experienced role strain, the stress that comes from the competing demands within a single role. Juggling AP coursework, dual enrollment, a GPA above 4.0, two jobs, and volunteer work isn't a flex. It's exhausting, but it's also shaped my identity more than anything else. I've learned that I can carry a lot, and that effort itself means something to me, even if it wears me out. When most people hear the word deviance, they think of crime or rebellion or something negative. But sociologically, deviance just means behavior that departs from social norms in either direction. And by that definition, I am deviant. I have what people call an overachiever's mindset. I believe that failure is not an option, not because I think I can never fail, but because I refuse to let failure define me. I push constantly. I produce constantly. And most people around me don't operate that way, which makes my behavior statistically and socially unusual. Robert Agnew's strain theory helps me understand where this comes from. Agnew argues that the strain, the gap between where you are and where you're meant to be, produces negative emotions, and those emotions drive behavior. For me, that strain is a fear of failure. My hyperproductivity is almost a coping mechanism. If I keep moving, keep producing, keep achieving, then failure can't catch up with me. It's not entirely healthy, and I know that. I burn out regularly. That burnout is a real consequence, a quiet sanction for pushing too hard. But here's something that's fascinating. Because my deviance looks like hard work, I'm largely protected from the harsher social judgments that other deviants face. My friends tease me for being too focused. My teachers and parents praise me for the same behavior. The sociological concept of the halo effect explains this. People with desirable traits tend to receive lighter social sanctions, even for the same underlying behavior. My overachievement is deviant. It's just deviant in a way that society rewards. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote, "So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past." That line comes from The Great Gatsby, a novel obsessed with the American dream and how difficult, often impossible, it is to truly achieve. Social ability is the ability to move through socioeconomic classes, and in theory, America is built on the idea that anyone can do it. In practice, it's far more complicated. Dr. Richard Reeves uses the term sticky floors to describe how people born at the bottom tend to stay there. Nearly 40% of children born into lower socioeconomic classes remain there for the rest of their lives. He also points to a glass floor for the wealthy, the resources the upper class uses to protect and maintain their position, which makes it even harder for others to rise. I've felt both ends of this. I started life in the foster care system, among the most economically vulnerable positions a child can be in. Then, I was adopted into a family that lives in comfort. Not extreme wealth, but stability. I didn't earn that transition. It happened because of a legal process, a policy, and two people who chose to open their home. That's not the American dream as a meritocracy. That's social mobility shaped by institutions and luck and grace. Dr. Chetty's research identifies 5 predictors of mobility: segregation, income inequality, school quality, social capital, and the share of single-parent households. In my town, I had access to strong schools, community connections, and a 2-parent household. I didn't have to fight those structural obstacles. Not everyone gets that starting line. So let me bring this full circle. My identity isn't just the product of my choices. It's the product of the foster care system, of an adoption policy that gave me a tuition waiver, of a well-funded school district, of a primary group that believed in me, of a community that was mostly homogenous but slowly became more diverse, of a substitute teacher named Mr. Arturo who showed me what it looks like to truly value freedom. Every single one of those things is bigger than me. Their social structures, institutions, policies, cultural norms, economic systems. And yet, every single one has touched my life in a way that feels deeply, intimately personal. That is the sociological imagination. That is what C. Wright Mills was talking about. The ability to look at your own story and not just see